Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we're going to cover 1 John chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, and I'm calling this one Victory in Jesus. It seems to be standard that the older generation typically is disgruntled with the younger generation. At the same time, younger people attribute that to jealousy, as the older generation no longer has young, vibrant bodies, and instead is in a stage in life when their aches and pains even have aches and pains. Philosophies change just as readily, but if modernization means stepping farther away from God, failure is at the door. Yet in the circle of life, those young people will get to that same stage eventually, unless they die young or the world ends. I remember a song that said, "Every generation blames the one before." But as I get to that advanced age in my life, I wonder if I may be in the generation when there is not another generation coming afterward. Certainly, other generations have felt that same way too, but there will be a last generation. We know that we are in the last days, just as John stated that he was in the last days, as we read earlier in this epistle. John's reasoning had to do with a number of false teachers. My reasoning has to do with Bible prophecy concerning the end times, along with apostasy and an increase in sin. Jesus had this to say in Matthew 24, verses 36 to 44. "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." Marrying, giving in marriage, eating and drinking are not sin, though all were mentioned in this passage. But Jesus was pointing to the fact that life continued as normal for all of the people who were about to be judged, without any regard for God or God's laws. We know that God is slow to anger, unlike most of us, with a slow-burning fuse. That fuse has lasted 2,000 years, since the world he sent his Son to save killed his Son. But in the days of Noah, God's anger reached a point of no return, and he destroyed the world he had created with the great flood. He did keep his creations intact by starting the world over again by saving 8 people on the ark, along with a male and female pair of all the animals and 7 pairs of the clean animals. Jesus compared the end times to the days of Noah, and this is how God felt about his creation just before the great flood. In Genesis 6, verses 5 through 6, it says this, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart." Today, sexual sin is pervasive. Murder and other violent crimes are at their peaks, and certainly loving others is at a low point. Politics and religion are particularly divisive. We live in a world that is not just tainted by sin, but polluted by sin almost entirely. Without living in the days of Noah, we cannot compare sin's pervasiveness to our current times, but it sure seems darker now than ever before, at least in my lifetime. Would it surprise any believer if this is the last generation? With that foundation, let's get back to 1 John. Today's passage, 1 John 5, verses 1 through 5, says this: Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves him, who begot, also loves him who is begotten of him. I'm going to say that again. And everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world? But he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. What does it mean to be born of God or born again? I think what happened to Noah and his family is a wonderful example. They overcame a sinful world, and God carried them to a new world. The sin of the previous world no longer affected them. God's commandments did not change from the pre-flood world to the post-flood world. Paul reminded us that we were slaves to sin, but now we are slaves to righteousness. That does not mean that we always will do what is right. But as we are born of God, and he is the God of righteousness, we will feel compelled by him who dwells within us to do what is right in his eyes. Before we are born of God, we live to please self, doing what is right in our own eyes. Sin used to be a lifestyle for us. Now it should be an exception that occurs in our lives, rather than a way of life. But the key to this section in 1 John is what comes with being born of God, by believing in the person and works of Jesus Christ. Because of Jesus, we have victory over the world. John specifically mentions that our faith is the victory that has overcome the world. Notice that he does not say that we will overcome the world, but that faith has overcome the world, past tense. John has mentioned overcoming in his other books as well. In John 16:33, it says this: These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. We would have no chance at overcoming this world if Jesus had not overcome the world. And here's one from Revelation 3, verse 21. To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. This was part of the letter from Jesus to the lukewarm church of Laodicea. Overcoming this world will give us an incredible place in the next world. And here's an important exhortation to all believers from Romans 12, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Part of that is to continue to walk in the joy of the Lord, even when surrounded by evil. Living in a sinful world is a challenge. It is not just the temptation to sin or the pervasiveness of sin. As believers, we live in a sinful world that feels normal to those who are not born of God. Just status quo for them. But for us, it should feel like it is not our home, because it isn't. This world is in conflict to the ways of God. And as believers, we should be keenly aware of that ongoing conflict, ensuring we do not allow the world to pollute our knowledge of God, our adherence to his laws, or his calling on our lives. We do not overcome the world by fighting against it. Instead, we overcome the world by obeying God. We also love God back because he loved us first. with that same obedience. The world is governed by people, not by God or godly people. Politicians argue over issues that should not be issues. For example, they refer to women's rights to choose instead of calling it what it is, the right to commit murder to an innocent life God created who cannot defend itself. How could anyone consider that as good, moral, or ethical? As believers, we are aliens, strangers in a strange world. It feels like we all are playing the character Pigpen from Charlie Brown, walking around in a cloud of dirt. To overcome this world is to be surrounded by dirt without getting any dirt on us. If we love Jesus, we also love the Father who sent his only Son to save us. And if we love God, we can demonstrate our love to him through obedience. Follow his commandments. Those commandments have not changed, but we know that God has not changed either. It is the world that has changed. Each day, the world seems to take a step further away from the Ten Commandments, when even for atheists, God's laws should seem reasonable and helpful. James had this to say in James 4, verse 4, "Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." Rather than being adorned with the riches of this world, we have been adorned with the righteousness of Jesus. How can that be improved upon? On this earth, a battle rages. Who has the most power? Who is the wealthiest? Who is the most famous? Who is living their best life? I really despise that phrase that I hear so often these days. We only can live our best lives when we are living for our Savior. Otherwise, if we are friends with the world, we'll be at enmity with God. We will be enemies with God. Enmity means hatred, hostility, animosity. Live in the world without getting any of it on us. And most importantly, we can combine that with what John has stated earlier in this epistle. Love God, love others, do not love the world. Another world is coming that we will love. God bless you. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina.